Hey guys, my name is Stephen Lowe, and I am the author of Overcoming Gravity, this book. So today we'll be going through Overcoming Gravity Online Part 5, which is still the fundamental knowledge base, and Chapter 5, which is basically the intro to programming, and this covers a whole ton of stuff. So it's a very long chapter. So this video is probably going to be pretty long. It's going to be intro to programming and linear progression, stress, adaptation, supercompensation, and the fitness and fatigue model, and then basic periodization and inter-workout structure, attributes in regard to training, and then the basic hierarchy of a routine. So let's get started since it's long and we need to go fast. So, intra-workout programming. So, you can basically think of programming it as it's not something that's very complicated, but basically it refers to purposely scheduling workouts in order to make specific gains. And so, the ways you can do this is mainly to change the various variables of routine. We're talking intra-workout, so it's within the workout. So, in this case, it's changing the intensity and the volume, the reps, sets, and exercises to progress. Obviously, you can also change the frequency of your workouts. So that would encompass everything at once. But mainly, we're going to talk about intensity and volume in this. So one of the basic progressions that one can use that is popularized by Mark Ripito and Starting Strength is the linear progression. And that's basically increasing the weight every workout. And so the example that is used in the book is, say you're doing 3 sets of 5 reps of squats. You can start with the bar at 45 pounds, and then next workout, you could start with 50 or work up to sets of 55 pounds, then 65 pounds, and 75 pounds, and so on. So that is a basic linear progression. And what linear progression means is basically that from each of those workouts to workouts, you're trying to increase the weight. It doesn't necessarily need to be the same increases. It could be 5 pounds or 3 pounds, but your goal is to increase the load every time, and that additional stimulus on the muscles is going to produce strength and hypertrophy adaptations. So the general rep ranges that are tend to be most useful for beginners are the 5 to 15 range, and that is tends to be the most effective for strength and hypertrophy for beginners. Generally, with the progressions that you're working through in bodyweight training, you start with around 3 to 5 reps once you're moving to a new progression, and you want to build up those reps over time. Unless you're using like weighted vests or something, you want to build them up 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Once you're in the 10 to 15 range, you can usually sometimes go to the next progression, but building up has a good amount of practice with that specific exercise progression, which is helpful for increasing strength. And then obviously, the rep ranges are still good for strength and hypertrophy as well. So you can also manipulate the amount of exercises and sets to progress from workout to workout. So for beginners, for example, they don't require much to progress. You can even get somebody doing, say, 1 to 2 sets of push-ups, and they'll be able to increase on that. If they were previously sedentary and not doing much, they can progress with even just as few as 1 to 2 sets. Um, Whereas somebody who is more intermediate or advanced, 1 to 2 sets won't help them progress much, if at all. And so the amount of volume needed to progress generally increases since the homeostasis of your muscles, the amount of stress that they can tolerate, or your work capacity, quote unquote, increases over time as you get stronger and bigger. So it takes a bigger and bigger stimulus usually to adapt to make and elicit strength and hypertrophy or endurance gains. And so this is why I see professional athletes training with usually very heavy weights and doing very frequent workouts. They're adapted to that high amount of intensity and volume, and they're not necessarily doing high intensity all the time. It's usually wave loaded in some respect, but overall, they're used to working out and usually have been for decades. And so what they're doing is not something that a beginner should be doing. And so you see this type of thing over time. So usually beginners start with less and add more over time. And if you need to, add a little bit more. But as you progress, that range in which you need to add more usually tends to go up over time. And we'll discuss that more in some upcoming chapters. So stress, adaptation, and supercompensation, as you can see in the bottom left image, uh, basically, that covers how a workout adaptation works. But before we get there, I want to look at basically the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems. The sympathetic is your fight or flight system, and basically, this is the one that is getting worked during workouts as you're using your ability to exert strength, whereas your parasympathetic is usually called the rest and digest system, and that is the one that helps mostly with recovery. So you have to have a balance between these in order to work out hard and then also recover hard so that your body is able to adapt, get the muscles stronger and bigger, get your nervous system more adapted to the strength training, and dissipate any potential fatigue. And so there is an interplay between these things, and it's usually called the fitness fatigue model. Um, and yeah, basically, what that means is when you work out, you're eliciting fitness adaptations. So, as we covered in some previous videos, you're getting neurological gains, you're getting muscle gains, but usually these things take a little bit while to recover. If you train strength, your strength will start to go down during the session because you become fatigued. Sleeping will help you start to recover that. Similarly, when you work out your muscles break down and they have to be repaired over time with protein synthesis. And so you have to eat enough and sleep enough to recover. In general, for us, the basic main thing to understand is that beginners tend to be able to recover effectively from workouts in about 2 to 3 days. And so that's why the common 3 times a week full body routine is tends to be best for beginners because it allows the 2 to 3 rest days between each workout. So as you can see in the images, once you work out, your ability is depressed for the first probably about 24 to 48 hours. And then after you rest, digest, and let your body recover, usually you'll come back stronger. And the goal for all of our workouts is to be able to loop those workouts together in a pattern where over time you get a positive training effect. And so, as you can see in the bottom right, um, as long as the workouts are grouped together correctly, you should be able to have progress that goes up over time. And it should be fairly smooth, at least in the beginning for beginners. So covering basic periodization and inter-workout structure. Periodization was basically conceptualized by the Russians in 1950 to 1970s. Not necessarily named that back then, but the formula of what they came up with then was similar to what it's called now. And basically, you're changing the intensity, volume, and frequency over time. And so, obviously, when we looked at the intra, we just looked at the volume and intensity, but we're adding in the frequency. And the goal of the programming or structured workouts is to aim for progress in the long run. So, there's mainly three different components of periodization, which is your microcycle. So generally, it's about a week long, standardized to what we do with training nowadays, usually based on a weekly cycle. The mesocycles are several weeks to months long, and they encompass basically trying to get those string together those positive training effects so you get progress throughout the mesocycle. And then macrocycles, I'm usually looking at uh, several months to years, and for specifically in training for Olympics, um, Olympic athletes can have their workouts set to um, basically peak at the Olympics, and so you plan the workouts for those next 4 years, basically structuring them so that you can peak at the Olympic Games. And so there is a lot that goes into programming behind the scenes, especially for like elite athletes, but not something that we need to worry about right now. So your basic mesocycle structure is basically put on different modes of training, and this is termed sequential periodization. There's many different types of periodization, but we'll get into that a little bit later in subsequent videos. But basically, in the structure they came up with, there is a preparatory phase, which is getting the body ready for exercise, usually by doing some conditioning, more high rep uh, workout type stuff, maybe in like 10 to 15 range. And then in the second week of the microcycle or third week, maybe you do a week or two of preparatory. In the second week, you aim for hypertrophy phase, generally in the about 5 to 10 rep range. So you're moving heavier weights than in the preparatory phase. So you're starting to ramp up your strength as well. The hypertrophy phase was aiming to put muscle mass on the muscles to get the muscles bigger, as that is a component of strength, as we learned with the strength equation. And then with the next week after that would be a strength. So you'd aim in the about 3 to 5, maybe 6 rep range, aiming to increase the neural adaptations and your nervous system for strength, like recruitment, synchronization, so on. And then the last phase would be a power or like maxing phase, where you tend to work with your max weights, such as 1 to 3 rep max, or doing power work, which would be lighter weights in the 3 to 6 rep range, and focusing on generating as much speed with the movement as possible. And so this basic structure allowed an athlete to work with uh, higher rep ranges and then working down to lower rep ranges, and basically stimulate the a constant amount of adaptation, converting hypertrophy, strength, and then subsequently, the last one on power into peaking for a competition such as Olympic weightlifting. And then this structure is also used for to great success with powerlifting as well. So pretty good structure for strength sports. There are some cons to it, but I'm not going to cover that right now. It's too long. Um, Basically, the key for the mesocycle is to, yeah, basically do what I said before and convert all of the gains you have into a max lift at the end. But for our purposes, most of our microcycle and mesocycle, so up to about a couple months, is aimed at increasing strength and hypertrophy. Most of us aren't going to be competing in competitions, so we don't have to worry about maxing. But we do want to structure our workout routines to the appropriate rep ranges in order to work strength and hypertrophy, to get the skills that and goals that most people are working towards. Okay, so attribute training. This is one of the most important things for people to learn, and often can be one of the most confusing. So one of the common questions is, can you do lots of things like every day? And what can you do on off days? Can you split apart your workouts and so on? And so to get into that, we need to go into a little bit of background. So Colley and Evans of Dynamax basically came up with a list of 10 attributes: cardiovascular endurance, stamina, strength, flexibility, power, speed, coordination, agility, balance, and accuracy in, I believe, a late 1990s or early 2000s article on their website. And Dynamax was making like medicine balls and other fitness equipment at that time. This got picked up by CrossFit and incorporated into a lot of their movement types. So they wanted to work on all of these various factors at once. And obviously, you can tell CrossFit workouts tend to work a lot of them. But these are basically all different types of fitness attributes, and they all require some amount of frequency to work, and some can be worked more often than others. And so I like to classify that most things into 3 different categories based on intensity. So low intensity or more recovery based, and that's where you're typically going very light, and you typically feel better than when you started with this type of training. There is moderate, where you're doing moderate intensity exercises that can be fatiguing in the moment, but sometimes is okay on consecutive days. And then there's high intensity or workout type intensity where you're going pretty hard and focusing mainly on attributes like strength, hypertrophy, endurance, like the main big three there. And usually you can't necessarily do those types of things multiple days in a row. And the reason for that is high intensity works the sympathetic nervous system very hard, as we learned. And so you generally need more parasympathetic rest and digest recovery for that to dissipate the fatigue to allow you to effectively train the next workout. So most of the big attributes that most people want to train, your strength, your hypertrophy, your endurance, are generally based on high intensity workouts, whereas things that are lower and moderate intensity you can do more often. So like if you're stretching very heavy at high intensity and you're getting like sore after that, that tends to mean you're not going to want to stretch many days in a row. But if you're stretching very lightly, you can even do that like 6, 7 times a week. So something low intensity like walking, you can pretty much do every day and recover from effectively. But if you're doing a lot of jogging, you'll probably need to throw in some rest days here and there. Even with like list cardio, low intensity steady state where you're staying under your anaerobic threshold, you generally need to have some rest days here and there with that type of training. But if you're sprinting, which is high intensity, you generally need rest days between each of those. So as you can see with the running example, basically, if you're going low intensity, it's something you could do more everyday type of stuff and not affect your recovery. Whereas moderate, you may require some rest days, and then high intensity, you definitely require rest days. So things like flexibility, mobility, and skill work at low to moderate intensity you can generally do more often. Whereas things at high intensity, which is training for specific attributes, generally you need the extra rest days. So it can be good to think of all these types of things. So, like your cardiovascular endurance, stamina, strength, flexibility, in terms of intensity relative to frequency and volume. And it can allow you to train some things every day, but some things you need more rest for. And when in doubt, more rest days are usually helpful because most people generally don't know how much fatigue they're accumulating in workouts unless they're very experienced and know how much their body can tolerate. And so, if you're a beginner, more rest is generally better, and you can always add more if you need to add more. But if you're doing too much, it's hard to tell if you need to do less or more if you're not progressing. So, the basic hierarchy of routine is um, that I like to use is warm up and mobility, then skill and technique work. Then after that comes the strength portion of the workout with your power, your isometrics, your eccentrics, and regular dynamic or concentric strength training. After that, usually you can do some type of endurance, metabolic conditioning, intervals, or specific exercises like isolation if you need it. And then after that, usually is your prehab, rehab, flexibility, and cool down. So generally, sports science now has shown that if you are doing some type of like endurance training, such as like cardiovascular stuff, you generally want to split it apart from strength training by 6 hours. But for those who can't, having them in the same workout is okay. But usually something like AM endurance and then PM strength or vice versa tends to work out and get the most gains because of the interference effect of the two pathways, strength and hypertrophy are more mTOR and endurance is more AMPK. And so there is some interference effect if you try to do both at once. So splitting them apart is superior, but if you only have one workout session a day, it's okay to do both of them. You'll get some gains of both, but usually not optimal gains. So going into the basic hierarchy of routine, a general sample routine tends to have the different components. So such as the warm up with burpees, crawling, or like jogging, anything to get the body and blood flow going. And then specific mobility drills for the specific joints being worked. So, for example, with upper body exercises, your wrists, your elbows, and your shoulders, ankles, knees, hips, back, and then also doing some specific light connective tissue conditioning and control. So, for bodyweight strength training, that's often going to be something like support holds, especially on rings and working up the rings over time, and skin the cats, and then still work. Basically, for gymnastics, mostly that is like 5 to 10 minutes of handstand training. For strength, that's going to be what we covered, such as your pull ups, dips, rows, push ups, squats, these step ups, hitting your legs as well, and then hitting your anterior and posterior core, such as like L sits and reverse hyperextensions. And then endurance if needed, or any isolation exercises if needed, if somebody wants, specific hypertrophy work, such as bicep curls. And then prehab flexibility and cool down at the end. So specific things to do injury prevention, such as face pulls, potentially bicep curls here as well, if you didn't include it in the other specific exercises. Um, Things like gymnastics bridges and deep breathing to cool down. So that is a basic routine. The next few videos are going to go through each section of the routine and elucidate, actually not the next one, but several down the line after the next video. We're going to go over the specific parts of the routine and how to set that up for a good workout routine that hits your specific goals.